From a successful business owner, Mr. Henry transformed into a completely different man after experiencing life in the guise of a poor person. This incredible change will bring you valuable lessons about life. Follow this video to discover the story of Mr. Henry's transformation. The biting London wind whipped at Mr. Henry's face as he stood across the street from his flagship Royal Electronics store on Oxford Street. The store, a gleaming testament to consumerism, pulsed with the vibrant energy of bustling shoppers. Neon signs flickered, reflecting off the polished glass facade, showcasing the latest gadgets and technological marvels. But Mr. Henry's gaze wasn't drawn to the dazzling displays. His eyes were fixed on the subtle undercurrents of activity, the hurried movements of the salespeople, the hesitant expressions of some of the customers. He saw not just a successful retail outlet, but a potential stage for deception. For weeks, a disquieting unease had settled over Mr. Henry. It began as a subtle hum, a nagging feeling that something was amiss. Then came the whispers, carried on the winds of office gossip, snatches of conversations overheard in the boardroom, and cryptic emails forwarded by concerned employees. The whispers spoke of a creeping malaise within Royal Electronics, a betrayal of the core principles upon which his father, the late founder of the company, had built the business. Dishonest sales tactics, aggressive upselling, the exploitation of vulnerable customers. These were the accusations, and they clung to Mr. Henry like a persistent shadow. He desperately wanted to believe they were unfounded rumors, the product of disgruntled employees or jealous competitors. Royal Electronics was his father's legacy, a symbol of innovation and integrity. He had dedicated his life to upholding those values, carefully selecting and training his staff, fostering a culture of respect and customer service. Surely, the team he had assembled wouldn't betray his trust, wouldn't tarnish the reputation of the company he so dearly loved. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony of doubt ringing in his ears. He couldn't ignore them any longer. He owed it to his father, to his employees, and most importantly, to his customers, to uncover the truth. He had to know if the whispers were simply malicious gossip, or a reflection of a deeper, more troubling reality. He considered various options for investigating the allegations. He could send in mystery shoppers, conduct internal audits, or even hire private investigators. But those methods felt impersonal, detached from the human element of the sales floor. He needed to experience the store firsthand, not as the owner, but as an ordinary customer, vulnerable and unassuming. He needed to walk in their shoes to see the store through their eyes, to understand their interactions with his staff. And that's how the persona of Bob was conceived. Bob was everything Mr. Henry was not. Where Mr. Henry was known for his impeccable taste in tailored suits and polished shoes, Bob would wear a faded, patched-up overcoat, the kind that spoke of hardship and resilience. Where Mr. Henry's face was clean-shaven and his hair neatly styled, Bob would sport a salt and pepper beard, long overdue for a trim, and his hair would be disheveled as if he'd just woken up from a restless sleep. Where Mr. Henry exuded an air of confidence and authority, Bob would project an aura of quiet desperation, a man worn down by life's challenges. The transformation was more than just a change of clothes and hairstyle. Mr. Henry immersed himself in the character of Bob, studying the nuances of poverty, the subtle cues in posture, the hesitant glances, the weary sighs. He practiced a shuffling gait, a slightly stooped posture, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He even roughened his hands with sandpaper, a small detail that added to the authenticity of his disguise. He diluted his normally crisp, articulate diction with a hint of a Cockney accent, a subtle touch that would make him blend in with the working-class crowd. He didn't just want to look like Bob, he wanted to be Bob. He spent hours researching the lives of the homeless and the working poor, trying to understand their struggles, their vulnerabilities, their hopes and dreams. He watched documentaries, read articles, and even visited homeless shelters, trying to gain a deeper understanding of the challenges they faced. He wanted to embody the character of Bob, not just in appearance, but in spirit. He even crafted a detailed backstory for Bob, a retired factory worker, struggling to make ends meet on a meager pension, looking for a good deal on a new television. He knew that if he was going to pull off this charade, he needed to be convincing. He couldn't afford to slip up, to reveal his true identity. The success of his undercover operation depended on his ability to completely transform himself into Bob. The morning of his operation dawned, a typical gray London sky mirroring the apprehension in Mr. Henry's heart. He stood before the mirror, taking one last look at his reflection. For a moment, he didn't recognize himself. Bob stared back at him, a stranger with tired eyes and a world-weary expression. The disguise was complete, but it was more than just a disguise. It was an immersion into a different life, a life far removed from the comfort and privilege he had always known. He was no longer Mr. Henry, the owner of Royal Electronics. He was Bob, the customer, and he was about to step into the world of his own making. He left his luxury car parked several blocks away, opting for the underground, a final step in his transformation. As he rode the tube, he observed the other passengers, their faces etched with the stories of their lives. He felt a pang of empathy, a connection to the people he was about to deceive, albeit for a greater purpose. He wondered about their lives, their struggles, their hopes and dreams. He realized that he had been so focused on his business, on his own success, that he had become disconnected from the realities of everyday life for most people. Stepping out of the station, he took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He crossed the street towards the Royal Electronics store, the familiar logo now seeming less like a symbol of pride and more like a symbol of the weight on his shoulders. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of his deception pressing down on him. But he knew he couldn't turn back. He had come too far. He had to see this through. He had to know the truth. He owed it to his father, to his employees, and most importantly, to his customers. With a final, resolute glance at the gleaming storefront, Mr. Henry, now Bob, the down-on-his-luck customer, pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped into the brightly lit showroom. The air was thick with the hum of electronics and the eager chatter of salespeople. The hunt for the truth had begun. The bright, almost clinical, lights of the Royal Electronics showroom assaulted Mr. Henry's eyes as he shuffled through the entrance. The air buzzed with the low thrum of countless electronic devices, a symphony of beeps, whirs, and static hums. He kept his head down, affecting a hesitant, almost lost demeanor. He wanted to observe, to blend in, to become invisible. He wandered slowly through the aisles, past towering displays of gleaming televisions, sleek laptops, and the latest smartphones, his gaze flitting from one product to another, feigning a mixture of awe and confusion. He even paused occasionally, peering at price tags with a furrowed brow, as if mentally calculating his meager budget. He noticed the salespeople, their smiles polished, their eyes scanning the room, assessing potential targets. They moved with a practiced confidence, their bodies radiating an air of authority that Bob found both intimidating and unsettling. One young man, impeccably dressed in a crisp suit, detached himself from a group of chattering colleagues and approached Bob. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his voice smooth and practiced, like a well-oiled machine. Looking for something in particular? Bob mumbled a reply, feigning shyness, clutching his worn overcoat tighter around him. Just browsing, he said, his Cockney accent more pronounced than he intended. He hoped it added to his Bob persona, the struggling pensioner just looking for a deal. The salesman, who introduced himself as Alex, didn't seem deterred by Bob's reticence. He stuck to Bob like glue, his enthusiasm almost palpable, radiating a salesman's eagerness. "We've got some fantastic deals on today," he said, gesturing towards a wall of enormous televisions. "These 4K Ultra HD models are flying off the shelves. The picture quality is absolutely breathtaking. You'll feel like you're right there in the action." Bob feigned interest, asking a few basic questions about screen size and resolution, trying to sound as if he understood the technical jargon. Alex seized the opportunity, launching into a rapid-fire sales pitch, extolling the virtues of the most expensive models, highlighting features that Bob knew were completely unnecessary for the average viewer. He talked about refresh rates, HDR, and quantum dot technology, peppering his speech with technical jargon that he clearly didn't expect Bob to understand. The aim, Bob realized, wasn't to inform but to impress, to overwhelm him with a barrage of information designed to make him feel inadequate and push him towards a purchase he couldn't afford. It was a classic high-pressure sales tactic, and Bob recognized it instantly. "This one here," Alex said, patting a television that cost several £1,000s, its screen so large it looked more like a cinema screen. "This is our top-of-the-line model. Absolutely stunning picture. You won't find anything better." Bob winced inwardly. He knew the markup on this particular model was exorbitant. He also knew that Alex was deliberately ignoring his earlier mumbled indication that he was on a tight budget. He played along, however, feigning ignorance and asking about the price, bracing himself for the inevitable sticker shock. Alex quoted a figure that made Bob's stomach churn. It was even higher than he had anticipated. He then proceeded to add on a series of essential extras, including a premium HDMI cable, a wall mounting kit, and an extended warranty, each item adding hundreds of pounds to the total cost. Bob realized that this was standard practice. The salespeople weren't just pushing expensive products. They were also inflating the price with unnecessary add-ons, maximizing their commission at the expense of the customer. It was a carefully orchestrated strategy of upselling and price gouging, and Bob was witnessing it firsthand. Just as Bob was steeling himself to challenge Alex's tactics, to reveal his true identity and put an end to this charade, two women approached the sales counter. They looked tired and worried, their faces etched with lines of stress and anxiety. They introduced themselves as Linda and Susan and explained that they were looking for a desktop computer. "Our son," Linda explained, her voice trembling slightly, he had a stroke. He's undergoing physical therapy, and we need a computer so he can access online resources and connect with his therapists remotely. It's vital for his recovery." Bob's heart went out to them. He knew how expensive medical care could be, and he could only imagine the financial strain they must be under. He watched as Alex's demeanor shifted, his practiced smile taking on a new, almost predatory gleam. The vulnerability of these women, their obvious distress, was like blood in the water for a shark. "I understand," Alex said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, his eyes already calculating the potential profit. "I have just the computer for you." He led them not to the practical, affordable computers perfect for their needs, but to a display of high-end gaming PCs, machines that were far more powerful and expensive than anything they needed. He talked about processing power, graphics cards, and liquid cooling systems, completely ignoring their specific requirements for therapy support. He was speaking a different language, a language of technical specifications that these worried mothers couldn't possibly understand. "This machine," Alex declared, his voice ringing with false enthusiasm, "is perfect for all your needs. It's incredibly fast, reliable, and it can handle any software you throw at it." Linda and Susan exchanged worried glances. "It looks expensive," Susan said hesitantly, her voice barely a whisper. Alex brushed their concerns aside with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't worry about the price," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring but his eyes betraying his true intentions. "We have flexible financing options available. And besides, your son's health is the most important thing, right?" Bob watched in disgust as Alex took advantage of their vulnerability, exploiting their desperation to push them towards an unnecessary and overpriced purchase. He knew he had to intervene. He couldn't stand by and watch these women be taken advantage of, their already difficult situation made even worse by this unscrupulous salesman. He was here to uncover the truth, and the truth was staring him in the face, ugly and undeniable. He was witnessing the very tactics he had feared, the very behavior that threatened to destroy the reputation of Royal Electronics. He knew that the time for observation was over. It was time to act. The air in the Royal Electronics showroom crackled with an unspoken tension. Bob, his disguise as the down-on-his-luck pensioner momentarily forgotten, stood seething, his hands clenched into fists inside his worn pockets. He had listened, his stomach churning as Alex, the picture of polished professionalism, systematically preyed upon the vulnerability of Linda and Susan. The women, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion, were clearly in a desperate situation, their son's health hanging in the balance. And Alex, instead of offering genuine help, was manipulating their distress for his own gain, pushing them towards a ridiculously overpriced computer they didn't need and likely couldn't afford. He had heard enough. The carefully constructed facade of Bob was beginning to crumble under the weight of his anger and disappointment. The whispers he had dismissed as mere rumors now echoed in his ears, amplified by the blatant dishonesty unfolding before him. This wasn't just aggressive upselling, it was exploitation, pure and simple. Alex, oblivious to the storm brewing within Bob, continued his charade, his voice dripping with false empathy. "So, ladies," he said, gesturing towards the gleaming gaming PC, "this is the one. Top of the line, guaranteed to meet all your needs. And with our easy financing options." He didn't get to finish his sentence. Bob stepped forward, his shuffling gait replaced by a newfound resolve. His voice, normally hesitant and laced with a Cockney accent, now rang with a firm authority that startled even himself. "Excuse me," he interjected, his gaze fixed on Alex. The salesman, momentarily thrown off balance, turned to face him, his practiced smile faltering slightly. "Yes, sir," Alex replied, his tone laced with a hint of condescension. He clearly saw Bob as an interruption, a minor annoyance. "I've been listening," Bob continued, his voice growing stronger, "to your recommendations, and I have to say I'm appalled." Alex's smile vanished completely. He straightened up, his posture becoming defensive. "Sir, I am simply doing my job," he retorted, his voice hardening. "These ladies came in looking for a computer and I am showing them the best options available." "The best option," Bob scoffed. "Or the most expensive option? These women have told you their son is seriously ill. They need a computer for his therapy, not a gaming machine. You're taking advantage of their desperation." Linda and Susan, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, exchanged worried glances. They seemed unsure of what was happening, but they could sense the shift in the atmosphere. Alex's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to retort, but Bob cut him off. "Don't even try to deny it," Bob said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I've seen your tactics. The inflated prices, the unnecessary add-ons, the pressure you put on vulnerable customers. It's disgraceful." He paused, taking a deep breath to compose himself. He knew what he had to do. The charade had to end. "I've seen enough," he declared, his voice trembling slightly but firm. He reached inside his worn overcoat and pulled out his wallet. He fumbled for a moment, then produced his business card. He held it out to Alex, Linda, and Susan. Alex, his face a mask of confusion and growing apprehension, took the card hesitantly. His eyes widened as he read the name printed in bold letters: Henry Charlesworth, owner, Royal Electronics. The color drained from Alex's face. He stammered, Mr. Henry, I didn't realize." "No," Mr. Henry said, his voice cold and sharp. "You didn't, and that's precisely the problem." He turned to Linda and Susan, his expression softening with genuine concern. "I sincerely apologize for what you've been through," he said. "This is not how we conduct business at Royal Electronics." He then turned back to Alex, his gaze hardening once more. "You're fired," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Security will escort you off the premises." Alex, his face a picture of shock and disbelief, tried to protest, but Mr. Henry silenced him with a wave of his hand. "Don't say another word," he said. "You've said enough already." He then addressed the other customers who had gathered around, drawn by the commotion. "I want to assure you all," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity, "that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated at Royal Electronics. We are committed to providing our customers with honest, fair, and respectful service." The atmosphere in the showroom had shifted dramatically. The tension that had filled the air was now replaced by a stunned silence. The customers looked at Mr. Henry with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and relief. They had witnessed the unmasking of a dishonest salesman, and they had seen the owner of the company take swift and decisive action. Mr. Henry, the weight of his disguise finally lifted, felt a surge of mixed emotions. He was angry and disappointed, but he also felt a sense of relief and purpose. He had uncovered the truth, and he was ready to make things right. He knew that this was just the beginning. There was much work to be done to restore the integrity and reputation of Royal Electronics, but he was determined to do it. He owed it to his father, to his employees, and most importantly, to his customers. The echoes of Mr. Henry's dismissal of Alex still hung in the air, a palpable tension lingering in the showroom. The crowd of onlookers, a mix of curious shoppers and stunned employees, began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves about what they had just witnessed. Mr. Henry, the weight of his disguise now fully shed, turned his attention to Linda and Susan, who stood nearby, looking bewildered and slightly overwhelmed. Their faces, etched with worry just moments before, now held a glimmer of hope, mixed with a touch of disbelief. They had come to the store simply hoping to find an affordable computer, a lifeline to their son's ongoing therapy, and they had encountered something far more dramatic, far more unexpected. "Miss Linda, Miss Susan," Mr. Henry began, his voice softening with genuine empathy, the gruffness of Bob now entirely absent. "I sincerely apologize for the way you were treated. That kind of behavior is unacceptable at Royal Electronics, and I assure you, it will not happen again. I am truly sorry." He extended a hand towards each of them, and they both instinctively reached out and took it, his gesture conveying a sincerity that went beyond mere words. He gestured towards the computer display. Not the high-end gaming rig Alex had tried to push on them, but a more practical and affordable model, perfectly suited for their needs. It was a reliable machine, with all the necessary features for video conferencing, accessing online resources, and running the specialized software required for their son's physical therapy. "This computer," he said, "is much more appropriate for your son's therapy. It's reliable, easy to use, and it has all the necessary features. It's designed for exactly this kind of purpose." He then surprised them by adding, "And I'd like to offer it to you at the original wholesale price. No markup, no hidden fees. Consider it a small gesture of goodwill, a way of making amends for the unpleasant experience you've had." He knew that even at wholesale, a new computer was a significant expense, and he wanted to alleviate their financial burden as much as possible. Linda and Susan exchanged grateful glances, their eyes welling up with tears. The relief was palpable, washing over them in waves. They had been so worried about the cost, about how they were going to manage everything, and now this unexpected generosity had lifted a huge weight from their shoulders. "Mr. Henry," Linda said, her voice choked with emotion, we don't know how to thank you. This is more than we could have hoped for." "Please," Mr. Henry replied, his voice warm and sincere. "There's no need. It's the least I can do. Your son's health is the most important thing." He genuinely felt for their situation. He could imagine the worry and stress they were under. He then went a step further, adding, "I also want to include a complimentary software package designed specifically for physical therapy support. It has a range of exercises, tracking tools, and resources that I believe will be invaluable for your son's recovery." He knew that specialized software could be expensive, and he wanted to ensure that their son had access to all the tools he needed to get better. The women were overwhelmed by his generosity. They had come to the store simply hoping to find an affordable computer, a basic machine that would allow them to connect with their son's therapists. And they were leaving with so much more: a high-quality computer at a reduced price, and a valuable software package that would significantly aid in his recovery. They expressed their gratitude profusely, their voices filled with sincerity and emotion. They were truly touched by his kindness and his willingness to go above and beyond to help them. As Mr. Henry was finalizing the purchase, processing the paperwork, and ensuring that everything was in order, Linda's eyes widened in recognition. She peered at him more closely, her brow furrowed in thought. She had a feeling she knew him from somewhere, a sense of familiarity that she couldn't quite place. "Mr. Henry," she said hesitantly, you look very familiar. Are you, by any chance, Mr. Charlesworth's son?" Mr. Henry paused, a wave of nostalgia washing over him. He hadn't expected to be recognized so soon, not in his undisguised form. He had assumed that his disguise as Bob would have shielded him from recognition, but Linda's sharp eyes had pierced through the facade. "Yes," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I am." Linda's face lit up, a warm smile spreading across her features. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed. "I knew it. You have your father's eyes. He was such a kind and generous man. He used to come into the store all the time, always ready with a smile and a friendly word. He always made time for his customers, even when the store was busy." She then began to recount stories about Mr. Charlesworth, anecdotes that Mr. Henry had heard countless times before, childhood memories of his father's interactions with customers and employees. But hearing these stories from Linda, a customer who had directly benefited from his father's kindness, made them feel different, more real, more impactful. She spoke of his compassion, his willingness to help those in need, his unwavering commitment to his customers. "I remember one time," Linda said, her voice filled with warmth and affection. "My husband was out of work and we were struggling to make ends meet. Our old television had broken down, and we couldn't afford a new one. We came into the store, hoping to find a used model, but your father insisted on giving us a brand new one, free of charge. He said it was his way of helping out a family in need. Mr. Henry listened, his heart swelling with pride. He had always known that his father was a man of integrity and compassion, but hearing these stories from a customer, someone who had experienced his kindness firsthand, made him realize the true impact of his father's actions. It wasn't just about running a successful business. It was about making a difference in people's lives. Linda continued, sharing more memories of Mr. Charlesworth's generosity and his genuine concern for his customers. She spoke of how he had always put people before profits, how he had valued integrity and honesty above all else. She painted a picture of a man who was not only a successful businessman, but also a pillar of the community, someone who was respected and admired by everyone who knew him. As Linda spoke, Mr. Henry felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on growing the business, on maximizing profits, that he had, perhaps, lost sight of the values his father had instilled in him. He had become so caught up in the day-to-day operations of the company that he had forgotten the importance of human connection, the value of compassion, the power of a simple act of kindness. He had allowed the pressures of running a large corporation to distract him from the core principles that his father had built the business upon. He realized that he had allowed the whispers of greed and dishonesty to influence his decisions, that he had, in some way, betrayed his father's legacy. He had allowed the pursuit of profit to overshadow the importance of integrity and customer care. He had become the kind of businessman that his father would have disapproved of. The stories Linda shared were a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the kind of man he wanted to be. They reminded him of the true meaning of success, the real measure of a man's worth. It wasn't about the size of his bank account or the number of stores he owned. It was about the impact he had on the lives of others, the difference he made in the community. It was about upholding the values that his father had cherished, the principles that had guided his life. He looked at Linda and Susan, their faces now radiant with gratitude and relief. He saw in their eyes the reflection of his father's legacy, the enduring power of kindness and compassion. He knew then that he had a choice to make. He could continue down the path he was on, prioritizing profits over people, or he could choose to honor his father's memory by embracing the values he had lived by. The choice, he realized, was clear. He knew what he had to do. He had to change. He had to bring Royal Electronics back to its roots, back to the principles of honesty, integrity, and genuine customer care that his father had instilled. He had to become the kind of leader that his father would have been proud of. The encounter with Linda and Susan, the stories of his father's kindness, had a profound impact on Mr. Henry. It was a moment of clarity, a turning point that shifted his perspective and reignited his commitment to the values he had momentarily lost sight of. The incident with Alex, the exploitation of vulnerable customers, had shaken him to his core, but it was the rediscovery of his father's legacy, the realization of the positive impact he had had on so many lives, that truly inspired him to make a change. The very next day, Mr. Henry began to implement sweeping reforms at Royal Electronics. He started by addressing the sales culture, dismantling the high-pressure tactics and aggressive upselling that had become commonplace. He instituted mandatory training programs for all sales staff, emphasizing honesty, integrity, and genuine customer service. He made it clear that prioritizing profits over people would no longer be tolerated. The message was simple, yet powerful. At Royal Electronics, the customer always came first. He revamped the company's pricing structure, ensuring that prices were fair and transparent, eliminating hidden fees and unnecessary add-ons. He also introduced a new customer satisfaction guarantee, empowering customers to return products if they were not completely satisfied. He wanted to rebuild trust, to restore the reputation of Royal Electronics as a company that valued its customers and stood behind its products. Beyond the immediate changes within the stores, Mr. Henry also took steps to address the broader issues of ethics and social responsibility. He established a code of conduct for all employees, outlining the company's commitment to honesty, integrity, and fair business practices. He also implemented a whistleblower program, encouraging employees to report any unethical behavior they witnessed, guaranteeing their anonymity and protection from retaliation. He knew that true change had to come from within, that it required a fundamental shift in the company's culture. He wanted to create an environment where employees felt valued and respected, where they were empowered to do the right thing, where they were proud to work for Royal Electronics. But Mr. Henry's commitment to change extended beyond the walls of his stores. He was deeply moved by Linda and Susan's story, by their son's illness, and he wanted to do more to support them during this difficult time. He stayed in contact with them, checking in regularly to see how their son was progressing and offering any assistance he could provide. He learned more about their son's condition, the challenges of his physical therapy, and the financial burden of his ongoing treatment. He realized that the computer and the software package he had given them were just a small gesture compared to the immense challenges they faced. He decided to establish a fund to help families facing similar circumstances, providing them with financial assistance for medical expenses, therapy equipment, and other essential needs. He named the fund after his father, the Charlesworth Family Support Fund, as a tribute to his legacy of kindness and generosity. He also became actively involved in local community initiatives, volunteering his time and resources to support organizations that provided assistance to families in need. He wanted to make a tangible difference in the lives of others, to give back to the community that had supported his family's business for so many years. The transformation of Royal Electronics was remarkable. The company not only regained its reputation for honesty and integrity, but also became known for its commitment to social responsibility. Customers flocked back to the stores, drawn by the company's renewed focus on customer service and its dedication to ethical business practices. Employees, inspired by Mr. Henry's leadership, embraced the new culture of honesty and respect. Mr. Henry, once driven by ambition and the pursuit of profit, found true fulfillment in making a positive impact on the lives of others. He realized that his father had been right all along. True success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the difference you made in the world. The story of Mr. Henry's disguise became a part of the Royal Electronics Company lore, a reminder of the importance of honesty, integrity, and compassion. It served as a guiding principle for all employees, a testament to the enduring values that had been instilled by the company's founder. And Mr. Henry, looking back on his journey, felt a deep sense of pride and satisfaction. He had not only restored the reputation of his father's company, but also honored his legacy by embracing the values he had lived by. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about wielding power or accumulating wealth, but about inspiring others to be their best selves, about making a positive contribution to the community, about preserving the good values of the family for generations to come. He knew that his father would have been proud.